and we'll go ahead and fire up Tableau. Now when you first open Tableau, if you've never used this before, it's a little bit intimidating and it can feel overly complex, but it's not that bad. So the first thing you have to do, they call it connecting to a data source, and they call it that because Tableau is designed to be able to handle data sources that update over time, which is really neat. So if you create a visualization and you go in and you update your data file, it doesn't crash everything that you've done. It's designed to connect to databases like SQL databases, things like that, or other web data sources that may update in real time or quite often, and you can watch the visualizations sort of adapt as the data in the background changes. So you're essentially what they'll call establishing a connection. Now, we've already formatted our data the way that we want it, so we won't be making any changes in the background, but it's important to understand this concept. So let's go ahead and click on open an Excel file. We're at our desktop. There's the basketball spreadsheet. Let's go ahead and open that up. And you'll notice down here that right now we're actually on the data source tab at the bottom. There's a sheet tab and some other options down here. But right now we're on data source, and it's saying that the sheet 1 data is here. And it's telling us what data it found, what the header names are, and what type, most importantly, what type of data it thinks that it is. And these are mostly correct, except for the number of courts is actually going to be a number, a whole number. So we can click on the type here, change this to a whole number. And the reason it's like that is when it imports from the Excel file, it reads them in as a series of strings. It doesn't know whether you want this to be the name of something or it's actually a number. It does a pretty good guess, but we can go ahead and manually specify that. And there is a data interpreter that you can turn on that will attempt to guess this for you, which let's click that, and there we go. So it helps. There you go. So let's turn that back off and let's undo that. I'm going to go back a few steps. So you do have a data interpreter which actually nails it on this one, but in the event that it doesn't, I want to show you how to manually set these. So let's set the number of courts to a whole number, and let's set the longitude, latitude to numbers as well. And the reason we want to set these to numbers is that there's something called a geographic role. Now, most of these have no geographic role. If it's the number of courts, that doesn't indicate any sort of location information, but the longitude, latitude is there specifically to provide some sort of geographic reference for a map. If we look at the options here, longitude, latitude is missing. And that might be confusing at first because it's labeled correctly and the numbers are clearly, that's what that is. But if we go here, we don't see the geographic role for those. And that's because strings are not valid data types for longitude, latitude values, only numbers. Okay, this is not represented any other way. And in this case, it's a decimal number. So if we change that over to a decimal number, both of these, you'll notice it loses some precision. That's not actually gone. Okay, we went from 4 decimal places to 2. It's just representing it with 2 decimal places. But when you do your calculations or your visualizations, the actual full length of whatever the original value was is still there. And we'll see it reappear when we go in now. And so this is a number. And the geographic role, we'll notice that latitude and longitude are here. And this is latitude. So let's go in, change this to latitude. And we'll notice that it puts the precision back up. And it goes all the way up here. We don't have data that specific, but we're pretty good. And that also converts the icon to a little globe. So we know now that this is, it's a numerical representation, but it's not just numeric. It's got a geographic role. In this case, latitude, longitude. So now Tableau understands that these are textual representations of whatever it is. In this case, these are locations. This is a numerical representation. This is a text. This could theoretically be a Boolean value if you wanted to. It could be like a true-false value. And if we convert that over, it doesn't really work. It's not formatted that way, but if you had it as true-false, you could make this a Boolean, or 0 and 1 if your data is represented that way, like a 0 represents not accessible and a 1 does. You could switch this to a Boolean value. So let's go ahead and undo that. We'll hit Control-Z and go back to ABC. So this looks pretty good. Now we're set. This is essentially the same type of conversion here that would happen if we turned on the data interpreter. And you can generally leave the data interpreter on, but just scan over your data first to make sure that it's got everything the way that you want it, because if it doesn't, you're going to be disappointed when you try to build your map. It's just not going to work. So now that we're set, we'll go down here to the little orange tab where it says Go to Worksheet, and we can begin building our actual worksheet. So this is a blank Tableau worksheet, and it's extremely confusing at first if you're coming from Excel, because it doesn't behave anything like Excel. But with a little bit of practice, it's not that bad. So what we need here is a set of data that can represent itself in some sort of visualization. And we have this show me little window here, and it shows the different types of visualizations that you can do. And we're going to do the one called Symbols Map. It's a little map here. If we highlight over that, down here in the bottom, it describes we need at least one geographical dimension. We're going to have two because we're going to have longitude, latitude, but a single dimension would be, for example, like a zip code or a city name. If you had those, you could use them, but we're going to go ahead and use that. And then 0 to 2 measures. So interestingly, we can plot the latitude. We'll drag the latitude from the dimensions up here, one to the column. Okay, so these are all the latitudes. And we'll drag the longitude over. And now we have latitude, longitude. If we click on the map, we'll notice that we now have sort of a visual representation of a map. And we're going to need to zoom in several times to this. It looks like a giant blob, but if we get closer and closer, we see that the coordinates are actually on here, and each dot is represented. So we know, because these are representing basketball courts, that this is the location of all the public basketball courts in New York City, and that's pretty cool. So that's the first step. Now, it doesn't tell us a lot. It is kind of neat, but it doesn't really tell us a lot. And the map's pretty bland. It's actually almost blank. It doesn't show us a lot. So let's modify this a bit, see what we can do. So the first thing that we want to do is maybe color code these to whether or not they're wheelchair accessible. And we have over here the accessible dimension, and that will let us do the things that we want to do. So we'll drag this value, we can drag it into the marks, and when we do that, you'll notice that the tooltip changes, and it shows there's one that is accessible, there's a bunch that are not. But we don't really need, per se, this. We may want it in there, but we may want it color coded. I think the color is a better representation, because we don't want to have to go over each one to find out whether it is or not. We'd like it to be pointed out to us. So if we take the accessible dimension and we drag it over the little color option here, you'll notice that it recolors each dot, each point on the map, to indicate whether it is or not. And interestingly, here are the ones that are null values. These are the ones that we pointed out before where there was no entry in the spreadsheet for whether it was accessible or not. So these we just don't know. Okay, we don't know if they maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But right now we can assume that they may not be, because an overwhelming majority are not. Now, the color coding isn't intuitive. Orange color for no isn't quite as intuitive as we would like. So it is possible to change these colors. Let's see how do we do that. There we go. Double click on any of the values here, and we bring up our color palette. and we want to make no, let's make it red, and we'll make the null like a yellow. Okay, so these are, the stoplight colors. These are pretty easy to understand. The no is no, it's green. Yes, yes is green, no is red, and we don't know. The null value is yellow. So if we apply this, now we have something that is a little more powerful. A person can look at this map and say, okay, we start to get a feel for some statistical information as well. Probably 90% or more are not accessible. Only a few are. And that makes sense in a way. There may not be as many basketball courts that are geared towards wheelchair basketball playing, and that's logical. But if that's something that's of interest to you, it's nice to be able to locate those. So again, you can double click on it and it shows you the information. You can change the colors. There's different color palettes if you want something a little more creative than just the basics, but that's up to you. So now we have a good color coding. Let's take a look at the tooltip. So longitude, latitude is great for putting the dots on the map, but it isn't so great for a person to understand. It really doesn't mean anything, and it's not helpful at all. So what we want to do is modify our marks options here to show some more valuable information. And in this case, I would say name or location, maybe both. So we'll try them both. We'll drag name and we'll drag location. And if we notice, now we have the name and we have the location on there, but the longitude and latitude are still there, and that's sort of annoying. We don't really want that, so we can modify that by clicking on the tooltip button right here. And this is sort of a programming interface, if you will, like a markup for the tooltip. And this is how Tableau actually processes each tooltip. It interprets your regular text as just a text item. Anything in these little brackets here, it's going to pull the variable itself from your dimension sheet. And so we see latitude, we can highlight that and get rid of it. And we see longitude, we can highlight that, we can get rid of it. And we can format these to show up any way that we want, as far as color, font size, font style, things like that. So that's up to you. I think it looks decent the way that it is. We could go in here if we wanted to create a new row, and one may put the property ID. So let's unbold that and make it gray. That appears to match the other fonts. We'll put property ID and then go to insert, and these are all the values we can put in here. And there should be, let's see, I don't see property ID. Let's hit OK. So you'll see that the property ID is blank. We should be able to drag that down here. And now go to tooltip. And property ID is an option. Okay, so it's actually pulling from the marks window here. Okay, so let's put that in. And it takes the formatting of the actual font here. So we want to make it bold. We want to make it black. And that will make it look like the rest. So hit OK, and there you go. That's some more valuable information for us. At this point, it's starting to look like a map should. We don't really, it's not immediately obvious where this is because the background map is pretty weak, but the data is fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. Now, these aren't sized according to the number of basketball courts or any other, like say the size of the park or anything like, or the hours that they're open. There's not really a lot more data here. And sometimes you'll see points that are like, some are big, some are very small. And that's when you have another attribute such as like if you had, these were houses and you had the square footage, you could make the each dot size relative to its square footage. So not only would you know the location, but you would know the size. So there are multiple attributes that can go in, but since these are just point indicators, more or less, it's not something that we're going to have. So let's take a look at how we can make this. I'm pretty happy with the points. So let's take a look at how we can make the map look a little bit more realistic and more intuitive. And that is going to be under the top here. We have map and map layers. And you'll notice under here we have some options, and we can choose from the map style. It's on light right now. So this is intended to make your data pop so that the map is there for a visual representation, but it's kind of there as a helper, not really to be part of the data. It's just kind of a background. If we change that to normal, we start to see a little more coloration here. Like we can see that, well, this is a coastal area. It may not be immediately evident that it's New York City, but we at least can get some sort of idea of what's going on here. And maybe we could turn the coastline on. You know, that just darkens the coastline. You can see that difference there. I like the way it looks. And maybe it would be nice to have some place names. Okay, there you go. So Brooklyn, Manhattan. Okay, so now we know where we are. Okay, we got the airport. These are major geographical locations and points of interest. So there are 2 airports and most of the major cities. And you can play with these, turn things on and off, and see. You'll notice if you turn on the streets, as we zoom in, and this updates, we have more and more data available to you. Just remember that every data point, every map layer that you put in here, it does make the map a little more busy and a little hard to read if you add too many of them. Now, fortunately for us, Tableau's pretty smart in that as you zoom out, the information will disappear. So it really only shows detailed street names when we zoom in far enough that we can see that will actually be helpful. So these cross grids here for these streets aren't visible at this zoom level, but if we were to zoom in, eventually the names would pop up. I have to go way in here. See if it'll update here. Nope. So even at that, it's not showing the detailed street names, but it's showing the major roads here, and that's what's important, because anyone who lives in the area is going to know the main intersections. So this looks pretty good here. We may also want to put in, if you're looking for the different area codes, you could turn that off and on. If you're looking for maybe the boundaries for the cities, you could turn those on, figure out, or for the metro areas, what metro area has the highest collection of this or that. So the layers that you turn on really depend on what information that you're looking for. So this looks pretty good. Zip code labels, obviously, while that's interesting info, it's too much text, so we'll leave that off. Zip code boundaries, not too bad of a representation, and this would be a little bit better if you zoom in, so you can start to see here maybe certain zips have a higher concentration of basketball courts, and this is where you're starting to actually interpret takeaways from your data instead of just looking at the raw data. So that's pretty interesting, but I'm going to take that out for now. So as of right now, this is a pretty strong map, and we've more or less finished with what we're doing here. We have the points, they indicate each basketball court. It indicates whether it's accessible or not, or whether we don't know, and it has the location in the name. Pretty good job there. Now, Tableau has some other powerful mapping capabilities, including what's called a data layer. Now, data layers are a way to enhance the map itself with other information that's commonly used to compare your data points. So let's take a look at some of the options. You'll notice there's race information, population information, income, household, things like that. And this is really interesting because it's already built in and it gives you, without having to go fetch the data yourself, a way to compare these. So for example, let's take a look at the median household income, and that's a good indicator of, you know, sort of the financial situation that people may be in. You know, the higher median income, you know, maybe the better the neighborhood is, or the better jobs people have, or maybe the more expendable income they have, something like that. So if we click on this data layer, we'll notice that we have another list here. This is a what's that called? A legend. There we go. This is a second legend. The first legend being the accessibility options. The second layer, or excuse me, the second legend being the household income, and it shows the brackets here, and it shows that the darker blue will be the wealthier areas, and the white will be some of the poorer areas. But this isn't really because there's a lot of, well, okay, let's try this. Let's actually, instead of breaking it down by state, we'll break it down by county, and we'll start to see more variation. So, but again, we don't, I mean, the different colors of blue and green are not really intuitive, I don't think. So I'd like to double click on, oh, let's see. Oh, it's down here, it's hiding from me. Go to the color range here and pick one that is a little more intuitive. So red and green. Okay, so there you go. So now we see that the poorest areas are red, the richest areas are green. That's a little more intuitive. And it doesn't clash really with the data points because they have this stroke on the outside in white. So the red circles are outlined in white. And that makes them pop even on a red background. But at this level, we can start to learn a little bit more. Now, the county median income is skewed because there are so many people in a small area, and there can be very poor streets right next to very wealthy streets. And so in some states where maybe it's a little more rural and the county income represents the different groups of people a little bit better, but in a place like New York, especially in the city, that may not be the case, maybe in the more rural areas. So what we need to do is take the data layer, maybe break it down a little further. So this is by zip code. So we start to see more and more isolation here. You see very wealthy zip codes, very poor zip codes, and we can go as far as the block itself. And if we zoom in on this, we see a tremendous amount of information once this updates here, that it's actually broken down by block, which is extremely powerful. So we can see little nests of higher income housing versus some of the lower income housing. And now it becomes clear what areas in the city are, you know, higher income than others. And this is where we can start to really understand what's going on. Let's pick we can try a different color range. I think the red and green was good. So immediately looking at this, we can say, okay, what do we see? Well, there's a high concentration of basketball courts in these lower income areas here. There are also some in the green. Okay, so here there's quite a few, and this isn't necessarily the lowest median income. but a lot of them are in the low income areas, and that's fairly common. Now in a particular location where there's a large swath of higher median income households, you're going to have parks. Okay, you're just going to have them, but they're fairly well spread out, maybe not quite as concentrated as they are in the lower income areas. So by this representation, just by clicking through and using our intuition to say, I bet there are more parks with basketball courts in lower income areas, well, it turns out that that appears to be confirmed with our visualization. And that's pretty powerful. And there are even other things like job type, white collar, blue collar, race, age, population, like the density, things like that. So there's a lot of ways you can compare the data, and you could do 2 or 3 of these with the same coordinates, but with different data layers, and compare and see what you find out. You can create a couple different sheets here, some different pages, and tell a story if you wanted to. So this looks pretty good. I think we're set. I should have covered everything that you have to do in Tableau. So let's go ahead and go to File and save to Tableau Public As. And you're going to want to sign in to your Tableau account. If you don't have one, create one, come back and sign in. And we'll name it Basketball Courts per Household Median Income. So that's pretty descriptive. Save that. Uploads the data to the server and spawns the site for us. And with any luck, there you have it. It's pretty interesting. So we have our legends here, and we have everything that we need, just like it looked. This can be downloaded, it can be shared, and you can edit some of the descriptive details here. So I hope that helps you out, and after this we'll check out another map tool that has some pretty powerful options as well. Thanks.